Well, as Mike knows anyway, sometimes as I get close to the microphone, things happen, so I have to spend a little time on this. I want to thank Mike again for this opportunity, but I do want to convey some thoughts from my companion in prison ministry, and that's Father Chris Reuter. Because of some recent surgery, he cannot be with us today as he continues his recovery. I want you to know that Father Chris and I, though, are coordinators of prison ministry for the Diocese of Belleville. And this area includes really the lower 28 counties of southern Illinois. And that is a state prison population of between about 16 and 18,000 that are incarcerated. And that's a good percentage of our state prisons population, sometimes around 35%. We now have clergy, deacons, and many volunteers who continue to go into those prisons, those state prisons, and provide the services that the men need. In reflection, though, in 2015, as you kind of heard, Bishop Schlarman and Chris Reuter got together and they organized this prison ministry for returning citizens, and we called it our Brothers Keepers of Southern Illinois. I think many of you will recognize that there's some scriptural verses in there. And if you go back to Genesis chapter 4, verses 9, the question is asked, am I my brother's keepers? And of course, I think we will answer, we sure are. So in the past, our ministry was really focused on going inside the prison, helping the men and women who were there. But when released, as Gladys told us, they have nowhere to go. So that began a process for us to looking at ways, and especially in East St. Louis, originally to build a house for 6 men. They would act as a family unit, and they would also receive the services they needed to re-enter the community. But again, due to delays in finding suitable housing and really rehabbing that housing and the cost associated, we finally decided that we would build our own house. But even there, we had some delays due to some environmental and some building problems on the sites. However, we are still looking to build that reentry house here in East St. Louis. So today, really, as Mike has said, we are beginning to provide the services that are needed to the returning citizens in this community. So we're starting with the program, the services first, but we are going to continue with that search and that building of that house. And I know in this association we have a sort of a proven track record into what Lutheran Social Services has already done. And so we're augmenting that and helping it in many different ways. So in closing, I would like to read a note that Father Chris sort of penned from his hospital room. And again, if he was here, he would have made it a much longer verse than I'm going to read, I know. The title, though, is Born Again. He says, I am so sorry I cannot be here to present at this happy occasion. After surgery and complications, I'm going through my own reentry. But I'm grateful to all my colleagues in LSSI and OBK who have stepped forward to keep this ministry in East St. Louis on schedule. I've been meditating on the scripture that we all love to quote. And that particular one was John 3, verses 4. It is the dialogue between Jesus and Nicodemus. And we really all have that same question. How can one enter into his mother's womb and be born again? We have many ways to express the act of conversion. It begins at baptism and continues throughout our lives. I want to suggest that prison reentry from death and confinement to freedom in society is one of those pathways to new life. He says before closing, I want to remind us that giving birth is a very feminine concept. Sometimes we who work mostly with male population can get stuck in our patriarchal language and approaches. Reentry ministry, I suggest, makes each of us midwives for rebirth. God is neither male or female and wants us to be gentle and loving. And finally, I want to thank Pastor Granger and First Lady Granger and his church for providing this space to begin our ministry here in East St. Louis. What could be more fitting than a place called New Life? Thank you.